Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the third of four in a series of panel discussions related to various key industries in Sioux Falls, organized by the Spark Sioux Falls program. These are intended as learning experiences for us so that the Spark Sioux Falls team and all of their partners can take what they learned here, go back and come back with some strategies to help our broader business community rebound from COVID-19. If you are joining us, especially if you are also in the healthcare, biotech, and retail industries, which we are going to be talking about today. At the end of this, I believe you're going to be receiving a survey from Zoom. You'll also, I think, get one of those in your email, and we would like you to share the same feedback that we're going to be asking our panelists about today so that we get an even broader reach. I want to thank those of you who have been watching with us for the last 2 weeks. Really good feedback, really nice viewership, and a terrific insight for all of us. So hopefully you have been enjoying that. And while we have a lot to talk about today, as I mentioned, some of those industries that we're going to be learning about are among those that have been the most dramatically impacted in a wide variety of ways during COVID-19. So I want to thank our panelists, as always, for joining us. There is, as I said, so much to discuss here. And as I always do, folks, there's no science to this. As I see your faces here on the screen, and I think I do have everybody on. Yep, just confirming. I'm just going to chat with you in the order in which I see you. So Bill Ladwig over at Lewis, you're the lucky one who gets to go first today. So Bill Ladwig is the Senior Vice President of Professional Services. We have Team Lewis, incidentally, as I'm calling them on the call today. They're tag teaming this on their executive team because we're going to talk both the pharmacy side as well as the retail side. Both of those areas have had considerable impacts over at Lewis. And Bill is my specialist in pharmacy. When I have a question, whether it's flu season or anything else, he's the guy I want to talk to. But Bill, wow, pharmacy has had a lot of impacts here in the last few months. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about the highs, about the lows, and about how things look today?
Well, it's been one of those dramatic shifts, and there was a little bit of concern when it first started. I don't think we realized the dramatic impact this would have because, and again, I think the biggest concern we've got with all of this is the unknown. It's the uncertainty, and we'll learn from it. But the problem is that we're trying to figure out and gauge public perception. Unfortunately, right now, I think there's probably more politics in this process than there is science, and that's the difficult part. So what we've seen is a mad rush to fill your prescriptions because they were in the concern was, hey, we're gonna have a shortage, the toilet paper process that we had, and we had that concerns with drugs. Well, we didn't, but that was the concern that was out there. And then after that, we pushed the processes and we tried to minimize contact. We put plexiglass up in our stores. We went to drive-throughs. We shut some of the stores down and only used the drive-throughs, trying to minimize patient contact. And probably the greatest impact that we did was actually go to a COVID call center. So we empowered one person to be our communication, because what we learned early on is this: when times of incredible uncertainty, you need leadership. And then with that, you really need to make sure that you've got, even if you don't know the exact path you're going to take, just reassure people that this is why we're doing it. There's a purpose for it. I know it sounds kind of difficult, and wearing masks is not comfortable. Where we started and where we are now has evolved dramatically. But I think just getting people to understand what we're doing, and then now the fallout from after that is, how are people responding to this? And you're seeing kind of a bifurcation in the belief process, the people who are all in and the people who are just done with it. And then how do you protect all? So it's been an incredibly dynamic change. And I know pharmacy will come out of this different than it went in. And we're trying now to gauge what exactly that's going to look like.
How are you doing on the supply side today?
The supply side, out front has been a problem just because of demand, because, that's a supply and demand PRL. You still can't find students in the hospitals. The pharmaceuticals, we've not had a major problem with. There's enough depth in there, but the conversation is occurring. I listened to Bloomberg on the way in today, is the fact that, the government's finally realizing that maybe going offshore isn't the best solution for getting your pharmaceuticals manufactured. So now there's a major push now to actually look at bringing it back to the United States. I think that would really assure continuity. because 70% of the prescriptions that are manufactured come from India. So, that is itself a problem, but it was a price-driven component. And I think now we're reevaluating the quality versus the price.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to you, talk workforce, talk other things, talk opportunities. I got some questions as far as that's concerned. So thank you for the overview. Now we'll move over to Dr. David Basil. He'll be up next, Vice President of Clinical Quality for Avera Medical Group. The last time I was face-to-face with Dr. Basil was back in March, as all of this was starting. We were over at Avera eCare, one of the very first interviews. I remember talking about what people needed to know on those initial days, and how they were supposed to call this central number with their symptoms to try to avoid overwhelming some of the various facilities. And there's so much to talk about since then. We have representatives from both our major health systems on the call today. And while we could go a lot of directions with this, because this is part of Spark Sioux Falls, we're looking at the business implications and the ways our business community can be supportive here going forward. We're going to focus on the business side of healthcare. So Dr. Basil, if you could talk to me about what that looks like, I think that would be pretty illuminating for people as far as, when you look at your business model, how that has had to shift in recent months, and where it's at today and where you see it going.
Yeah, things have changed so much since that time that we first spoke early in this. And just like all of us, this has been almost nuts at times, how quickly things have changed and evolved and the adapting to all of this. Those early days were all about the surge planning and preparedness, because at that point, all the modeling was showing, really pretty scary numbers for what we might be facing. And we were following a pretty exponential curve all at that time. And so we were shutting down all of our elective procedures, really narrowing down all of our outpatient visits, trying to retrain some of our capacity to be able to handle, a sicker patient surge, opening up additional ICUs, retraining hospitalists to be intensivists, retraining primary care physicians to be hospitalists. And so it was so much disruption at that point. And, with that much disruption, obviously, we were hemorrhaging millions of dollars a day in what we were preparing for that surge. And I wanted to give a big shout out to the business community and public at large, because they really turned things around for us by taking the social distancing very seriously, and they dropped us off of that curve and flattened that out. And so especially those early days, it was also all about supply chain. You mentioned that from the other side of things, we were facing, very difficult times as far as getting just masks and gloves and face shield. We were worried about pharmaceuticals. Inhalers were short supply there early on. And then all the testing supplies, trying to get a hold of those. So we finally got things under control. And so we peaked there in kind of early May, and then fell back to about half of our peak. And ever since then, we stayed pretty flat since then. And so it wasn't also, we were thinking we're going to see this big jump up and then just drop back down, and we could open things back up and not have to worry nearly as much. Now we've got kind of this smoldering COVID everywhere that kind of is the new normal. And so we talk about that underlying smoldering COVID that we still have to prepare for and make sure that we've got under control. At the same time, trying to safely reopen, get some of this deferred care brought back again. And we've been pretty successful at doing that. One of the most successful things I would say, that we've seen is some of those masking guidelines and stuff that have enabled us to reopen. One of the things that we did a couple of weeks ago is we did antibody testing, looking to see had we had our healthcare workers exposed. And so we looked at 100 of our emergency department physicians, nurses, all of our frontline staff, and we did antibody testing for COVID on them to see have they been exposed to COVID and fought it off. And they've seen, probably 300, 400, 500 cases through the ER during that time period. And we only had 2 people out of 100 that had a positive antibody response. And so one of my big takeaways is that masking does work. It's kept our healthcare workers safe. And that's also good evidence that it's going to keep our patients safe and that we're not spreading it around, in the healthcare setting. And so that's been such a huge relief to us seeing that those processes have been effective, because there was so much unknown about that early on, and were we putting our healthcare workers at risk? And so having that reassurance that they've been safe through all of this has just been remarkable for morale and kind of validation.
Wow, interesting. Okay. I want to talk more about where we're going, or where you anticipate we might be going, but we'll come back to that when we talk about how the business community might be able to support you. Lewis, part 2 is next. Scott Cross, you're next in line here. Scott Cross is Executive Vice President at Lewis, and we're going to talk about retail. You know, we got some interesting numbers just yesterday from the City of Sioux Falls regarding May sales tax, which was down pretty considerably. It was down 13%, but they also, as part of that, broke down which industries were seeing sales increases and which ones were seeing decreases. You can probably guess who was seeing a lot of the decreases, but on the increase side, retail was right there. Some of those general merchandise type of businesses, even some of those department stores. So Scott, talk me through what the last few months have been like from a retail perspective over at Lewis, and how things are going today. We need to unmute you, Scott.
How's that?
Perfect.
When COVID first hit, you know, we saw a lot of the same products leaving the store that everybody else did: paper products, disinfectants, hand soaps, and had some difficulty getting supplies. I think that's kind of flattened out now. But in talking with a lot of friends in the business, people are doing a lot of nesting. They're staying at home. They're investing in their residence, and so I would say the business partners that have seen a lot of success would be home improvements, between Menards, Lowe's, furniture stores have seen nice growth, and we've seen a lot of growth in all of our departments, and anywhere from school supplies, as you would imagine, and toys, because kids are at home now and not going to school. Cleaning supplies continue to be a big seller for us. But anything that has to do with the residents, our lawn and garden center, we were fortunate to have some nice weather in April and May, and so we've seen nice increases in that as well. And I think for us going forward, I think people were a little reluctant maybe to go to some of the larger box stores. So I think we've benefited from being a little smaller format, a little closer to home. I think that has really helped us as well.
Anything that you did from a business perspective that you think really worked and might translate well for other similar businesses?
I think for us, and Bill had mentioned that we did have one of our pharmacists was our COVID leader throughout the process, and so anywhere from the personal protective equipment, putting shields in the stores right away, trying to be at the forefront. And we've actually received a lot of feedback from customers appreciating the fact that all of our employees continue to wear masks. You know, even those in the garden center where you know, we've had some pretty hot days, and I know it's been miserable for them. But I think that's been an expectation of our customers, is that they would like us to wear masks. It makes them feel more safe. And so I think we've done that, and we've tried to do everything possible to keep the store clean. You know, we've intensified all of our cleaning procedures. You know, very similar to a lot of other retailers have done the same thing. But I do think the mask continues to be a big concern.
I think you're right. We surveyed on that as part of our COVID-19 recovery survey. More than 700 people responded, and more than half of them said they would actually be more likely to support a business that requires masking. Very strong majority, approaching 80%, recognized that masks are effective in slowing the spread of COVID-19. So there is definitely something there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Scott. We're going to go over to Dr. Dan Heinemann now, Vice President Medical Officer for the Sanford Health Network Group. Good morning, Dan. Nice to see you. Again, lots to talk about from a business model standpoint, talk about things being completely turned upside down. Walk me through what the last few months have been like for you, for your organization, and give me a sense of where things set today, please.
Well, as everybody says, it's been rather interesting and confusing. And what adds to that complexity is that many healthcare is a very regulated organization, a regulated business. And so there's been a lot of regulatory change that's come down in terms of what we can expect and need to do. As been alluded to, back in early March, we opened up our incident command. Incident command helps us to coordinate the efforts. And we have, not only did we have an incident command here at the Sioux Falls, at the Sanford Medical Center here, but we had a corporate incident command that coordinated things between our 4 major medical centers in Bismarck, Bemidji, Fargo, and Sioux Falls, because we consolidate all of our purchasing and all of our supplies. From a business perspective, when we had to stop doing elective procedures, that was a significant financial complicator, if you will. We're not able to do the elective procedures. No, that really reduces the amount of revenue that's coming into the organization. And then when you look at supplies, things that used to cost pennies now cost several dollars. Masks, face shields. Try to find a disposable gown or some of the other things that were necessary to protect our staff. Yes, and Dr. Basil mentioned the early models were rather scary. The part that was really scary was potentially losing 30 to 35% of your workforce because we're not adequately be able to protect them. How can we take care of this surge when at the same time we're losing the folks that are out there to take care of those patients that were coming that were kind of predicted to come to us? So again, upskilling or cross-training, as we want to talk about. The federal government came out with CARES Act dollars that are helping to defray some of the costs that we've incurred in getting ready for this pandemic and getting ready to care for patients. We did flatten the curve. We're now able to start to come back to some new reality. We're now doing surgeries. We're closing in on our pre-COVID numbers, but there are costs that come with that. We're testing every single surgery patient to make sure that they do not have COVID, SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 disease prior to getting a surgical procedure done. We're looking at what do we need to do to make sure that we can deliver babies safely and not infect staff or others if somebody has the illness as well. So it impacts just about everything we do from the time you come into the primary care practitioner's office till you deliver a baby or have a surgical procedure. And we know that, excuse me, I just didn't properly cover my cough. I hope people will realize that I did that wrong. I should have done this. Old habits are sometimes hard, but don't follow what I'm doing, do what I say. Our childhood immunizations are down 40% or more from where they were a year ago. That's concerning as we get into the summer months and get ready to go back to school, because there are vaccines that are required for school entry. Just simple things like pre-participation athletic screening exams that need to be done for student athletes as they get ready to start to prepare. So those are all things that are causing us to change the way we do things. And when you make changes, there are generally some expense, either in people expense, time expense, and or monetary expense that comes along with that, Joni.
Yeah, I want to follow up a little more on what that looks like from a financial perspective, which I will here in the subsequent questions. And I will point out that I believe you're safely isolated in your own office anyway, or at least based on
yeah, as long as I don't rub my face, I'll be okay.
Okay, all right. Controlling it the best we can here. And finally, I'm going to pull in Joni Johnson. This is going to be a really interesting perspective. Joni is the executive director of South Dakota Biotech. South Dakota Biotech is the state affiliate of the International Bio Organization. So Joni has a front row seat to not just what is happening here locally, but what's happening industry-wide. And this has been, I think, such an interesting, really monumental time for the bioscience industry. To see how this industry has coalesced around COVID has just been pretty remarkable. And that includes right here in Sioux Falls. So Joni, let's start maybe first with what you've been experiencing locally here for the last few months. And if you want to bring in a little bit of those broader industry themes, that's great too.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having us be here talking about the biotech industry. I know a lot of people talk about that, and it's pretty confusing sometimes to understand really what does that mean. At Bio, we say we feed, fuel, and heal the world. So we have different hats that we wear depending on who we're talking to. So today I put on my health hat and healing hat, and we'll talk about the biopharmaceutical industry in particular. I think what's interesting is that people don't understand how across the U.S. that South Dakota is a player. We have a lot of research that's going on here, and we have some great universities that are working really collaboratively with our healthcare systems. Was thankful to hear the perspective of both Avera and Sanford today, and Lewis, because it really is something that we all work for, and it is a great opportunity for our state in terms of economic development. I'm sure if you have not heard of SAB Biotherapeutics, you should pay attention to them. They're a company that's been around for about 15 to 17 years maybe, and they still are plugging away trying to get their product to market. That's how long this industry takes to get things to market sometimes. The regulatory pathway has opened up for them in particular because they do infectious disease therapeutic research. And so it's been a really great thing for them in terms of COVID-19, which sounds horrible to say because it's not great for anyone. But if there's ever a good thing that's to come of this, I think it's the way that SAB hopefully can get their therapy out to market and to help patients with this disease. And hopefully they don't have to be into the ICU, and we can get some treatments going before there's a vaccine. So this is a really interesting time for our companies. We have around 50 member companies that we represent, and ranging from universities to small startups to larger companies like Sanford and Avera, and in between. Some have done really well. Just talked about SAB Biotherapeutics. Others, Dr. Basil and Dr. Heinemann have talked about some of the challenges that the healthcare systems have faced. Our emerging companies, as they were not working on COVID-19 because it wasn't really a thing then, they struggled to find samples because there were no elective procedures being done. There was no mammogram screenings and that kind of thing. So they had to put some of their research on halt, which did give them opportunities to do some administrative work and regulatory tightening of the ship, so to speak. So there were things they were able to do, but it did impact our companies in a variety of different ways. But I think overall, they're going to do okay. There'll be some changes, hopefully from a federal level, that will make sense. I know the FDA has looked at a lot of things that they've done and made some changes, and I know they're looking at ways that hopefully they can implement some of those changes to get some of these smaller emerging companies to get their product to market and be able to collaborate with the pharma industry a bit more than they have been in the past. But by maintaining those strict safety standards, we want to make sure that that's there too. So.
Yeah, I will mention to you guys, I'm on the mailing list for a lot of the communications that come through the broader International Bio Organization. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of COVID-19 content coming through there. And when they feature those 10 or 12 companies that are most directly involved in working on therapeutics and working on vaccines, SAB Biotherapeutics is on that list. I mean, they have gotten so much national and even international press around this, and deservedly so. But Joni, do you want to talk a little bit about what exactly this has done to raise their profile and just the level of engagement that the bioscience community is now having with them?
Sure. Well, SAB is just a really interesting company, and their science is well beyond anything I can possibly understand. But what has happened is they've positioned themselves in the right way over the past several years that have aligned them to be really catapulted into the limelight. And it's been an interesting thing when you look back to see, gosh, how did they know that this might happen and this might work out the way that it did, which really will help patients in the end. Last fall, they started a partnership with CSL Behring, which is a biopharmaceutical company based in Pennsylvania, I believe. And they are working with them on their their technology basically, and doing some looking at manufacturing and helping them with as they go through some of their testing. It's a pretty complicated process to get a pharmaceutical drug to market. The clinical trials that are employed through each phase. There's 3 different phases, and they were partnered with them to help them with that process. And along comes COVID, and which has been really great. So they were able to fast track with the DoD and get some at-risk manufacturing money from them to be able to start doing some of that manufacturing while the product is still being tested. And as you said, there are just a handful of companies across the nation and the globe that are doing that. So it's pretty proud and pretty amazing that they're right here in South Dakota, and hopefully they can come up with something along with other pharma companies to be able to get some treatments and some vaccines going for patients.
Yeah, as long as everything has stayed on track, which I have no reason to believe it is not, I think we're probably weeks away from human trials starting in that therapeutic, which is specifically for COVID-19. So watch for more on that. That's going to be an exciting narrative to follow for sure. Okay, thanks everybody. That was round 1. Now we're going to go back and we're going to talk a bit about what happens next and how we might be able to help. So I'll return to Bill Ladwig over at Lewis. Bill, as you look ahead, what are some of the key ways you think the business community could help in your recovery?
Well, I think the biggest important part of this whole process is to make sure that you remember where the businesses are. I think a lot of the shift has occurred with, having Amazon delivered. And I think that's, it's easy, it's convenient. It may seem safer, but I think the problem is that people need to know there's a business community, because if you don't support your local businesses, you won't have your local businesses. And we've got 56 stores across 3 states, and we've had a lot of change occur recently. And, Mark Griffin's father started the company in 1942. It's a family company. It feels like a family, but we have a lot of very tenured pharmacy employees and store employees. We've had a lot of retirements, unfortunately, in the last couple of months because, of the risk, because we had a 93-year-old employee still working for us that just retired. A lot of 30 and 40-year veterans retire. So now we're having to train new people and bring new people on board. So I guess the evolutionary component with all this is that we just have to prepare. It's shifted, and that we need to make sure that we keep meeting the expectations of our patients and our customers. And again, it's probably just staying in touch, and that's going to be the most difficult thing, is to figure out where this is going to end up, because there's so much unknown and uncertainty and how long it's going to last. Because I know what we're doing now is going to be very, very difficult to continue. Getting people back in the store, getting comfortable. Immunizations, Dr. Heinemann mentioned the fact that immunizations are down. We stopped immunizations for 3 months now. So, you can't, it's the preventive part of all this that you really need to get engaged with. And that's what my concerns are, is that you could do this for a short time period, but this is not in anyone's best interest to continue going forward on.
Is there opportunity, don't want to get too ahead of things here, but let's say we do get a vaccine here in the short term, in the next 6 months, 9 months. Is there opportunity for Lewis to be administering that vaccine potentially, or doing any other sort of frontline care related to the virus?
That is the hope. I mean, that's what we're working for now. The timetable is highly debated. It depends which TV channel you listen to. But the end game is this is about getting, flattening the curve as much as possible, making sure we protect the people who are fragile. But then through all of that is just maintaining good maintenance, good health care. So the things that we're reviewing now, how to cough, all those different things are all part of the process that we just need to make sure we're aware of, because we've got a flu coming up, and the flu season's coming up. It's not that many months away. And so we're anticipating demand, because, historically, we still only run about a 40% immunization completion rate for the standard flu. It should be much higher than that. So time will tell as we get through this, but I think a lot of this is going to come on education.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. I'm gonna stick with you, and then we'll continue on down the line, because we always talk about workforce, and I think of your pharmacists being true frontline workers in all of this, and I know they really have delivered, and they've gone through a lot. from a workforce standpoint, are there ways the community can help in addressing what you project your future needs to be?
I think it's an awareness component. We've got a lot of pharmacists who really are not fans of wearing masks. But we have to reinforce to them, and it's been reinforced to me again today here to this conversation. That's really something that may be part of our future going forward, at least for the foreseeable future. We struggle with finding good technicians, and that's part of it's just been that way for a while, but it's hard. The pharmacists have a much broader education, understanding of the medical bill we're facing. It's much more difficult because it's an awareness component that exists amongst our technicians and amongst our clerical people, is to understand exactly what we're doing in the big picture. Because sometimes it seems to be, the shortcut seems to be easier. And sometimes you need to make sure that you do the preventive, the cleaning, the swabbing, the signatures, all those kinds of different things that all play into this. So, it's kind of like having people to be conscientious of what they do affect others. Because you can be in a group with 9 of 10 people who are following procedures perfectly, and the 10th doesn't, and then we have ramifications of that and causing problems.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. I'll go back now to Dr. Basil at Avera. Again, looking at those key ways that the business community can help in the recovery. I mean, when I just cringe when you talk about shedding millions, in days. I don't know that you get that back. I mean, obviously you've got a backlog of procedures that need to happen, but there's still only so much capacity. I don't know what that financial modeling looks like. So maybe you could give me some insight there. And then if there are ways that the business community can be supportive, let's talk about those.
Yeah, probably similar to what both Bill and Dr. Heinemann said. The most important thing is helping us get the word out that it is safe to come back to healthcare and get that preventative and chronic disease management care. That's probably the most important aspect at this point. We're really concerned that we're going to see an uptick in cancer, that we're going to see an uptick in heart attacks and strokes because people are not coming in and getting their mammograms, their colonoscopies, that they are not getting their immunizations, not getting their diabetes as well controlled as it used to be, hypertension, all of these, depression, mental health, all of these things we're really worried about. And I talked about earlier, we did the study that, even in our potentially our highest risk areas in our EDs, that the frontline staff that have been seeing this day in, day out have not been exposed to COVID. And so that's really good evidence that a patient who's coming in is not going to be exposed at that point. And so it is safe to come back and is safe to start getting those elective things done before, those preventative things. And we really need to work through that backlog and re-engage with our patients, or we're going to have a lot bigger problem from a healthcare standpoint of the adverse effects of not having all this care than the risk of COVID itself. And so that's probably the number one ask that I've got of the business community, is helping us get that word out. The other thing that I'll say is philanthropy is still an important part. We started the Avera Heroes Fund early on in this process. Early on, there was a lot of in-kind donations because supply chain. And so we got, some personal protective equipment donated, ethanol-based hand sanitizer donated. That was very helpful early on. How many ladies sewed cloth masks for us that we used in various, not direct patient settings and stuff that have been so helpful, and continuing, we're accepting those type of donations through the foundation. And so if you want to go to the local foundation and see how you can help that way as well, we would always be appreciative of that.
Okay, great thoughts. Thank you. I will stay on the workforce side of things too. I'm sure that has changed considerably. You guys had some well-established pipelines and programs and things like that for talent. I don't know what all that looks like now. But going forward, from a community standpoint, are there some things we can be doing on the workforce development side to further support what you think your needs will be?
Yeah, Dr. Heinemann mentioned before, early on in this process, the worry was, are we going to be losing workforce because they're going to be out sick or not? And we haven't seen, hardly anybody that's been getting occupational exposures and getting sick, but, because they are part of the community, we've lost a few. But more importantly, because we are so aggressive with our infection control processes, we have, quite a few people out on any given day because they do have just a little bit of a cough or a little bit of this or that. And, in an abundance of safety, we're asking those individuals to stay home and isolate. And so we are, always having to, that new normal of being a lot more aggressive about not being a hero, stay home if you have any symptoms whatsoever. We've also got new job descriptions that we never had before, screeners. I mean, you come into any of our facilities and somebody's going to be checking your temperature, asking you if you have any of those symptoms. Those people didn't exist. That job classification didn't exist, 3 months ago. And so what does that become? You were talking with us 3 months ago about the central call line people. We beefed up all of that. And so, those are all new positions that we're trying to figure out what becomes of those. And at the same time, we've got the underlying challenges that we've always had, especially in our rural areas. It's all about housekeeping, food service workers, and all of the nursing professions. The good news is we didn't have the healthcare workers put directly at risk. And so I think some of that fear levels really come down. And so that's helped with our workforce quite a bit. And certainly the mental health of our workforce is, as that fear level goes down, has really improved. And so, but they've all been such troopers through this. I just can't say enough about the healthcare workers.
Yeah, they have. Okay, great. Thanks, Dr. Basil. We'll come back to you in our next round to wrap things up a little bit. I'll go now to Scott Cross at Lewis. We're going to talk retail. Bill talked a little bit about that, Scott, but as we look ahead here, what are some ways that you think the business community in particular can support the retail industry in its recovery?
Well, I think our biggest concern is really the trickle down effect of people not being at work, having a financial difficulty. There's going to be a trickle down effect that it's going to start, for example, restaurant workers that are not working right now, they shop our store. People that might work in the entertainment industry, they shop our store. And so I think that's our concern is things have been good for us up through this point, but as that disposable income starts to go away, that's what we're concerned with. Not only on the front end, but also in the pharmacy. So those are our concerns. Workforce wise, we're in pretty good shape. Our biggest concern, Bill mentioned, was pharmacy technicians. It's also middle management, finding people that want to embrace the retail sector, which means you work nights and weekends because that's when your customers are shopping. So that continues to be a difficult scenario for us, no different than any other retailer.
Interesting. Okay. Well, and I would think that continued reminder to shop local, that never hurts either.
Yes.
Okay. I'll go back on healthcare now and return to Dr. Dan Heinemann at Sanford. When we go forward looking here and we look at what the business model looks like today, what do you think, Dr. Heinemann? What are some things that the business community can do to help Rebound going forward?
Well, I think it's obviously one of the things, when we started this in March, there was this much COVID and this much anxiety about COVID. Today, there's this much COVID and this much fear and anxiety about COVID. And we have to be alert that this virus is still with us. So the business community can help us in healthcare to keep that curve as flat as possible. Now, remember, when you flatten a curve, the area under the curve just gets spread out. It's still there. And in order for us to get and be financially, fiscally solvent again, or solid, I shouldn't say solvent, but solid, we need to get back to doing surgical procedures, providing care for our patients. But we have to do that knowing that there's this threat out there that all of a sudden we could have a spike. And remember, when somebody goes through an operation or a cardiac procedure, a certain percentage of them end up in our intensive care units because they need that kind of care after their procedure. So we have to make sure that we're constantly looking at the amount of surgical procedures we're doing, the amount of other things that might require ICU care, and balancing that with what's going on in the community around the need for ICU care and ventilator management from COVID. So what the business community and the community in general can do is help us to keep that curve flat. Wear your mask when you go out. Physically distance yourself if you can, and avoid situations where you might get exposed. Help us to continue to provide that care. We catch a lot of people are really concerned that we're not allowing just carte blanche visitors at the hospitals. We limit the number of people that come in to see our patients in the hospital. We limit the number of people that can come along to a clinic visit, primarily because we want to protect the others that are in our clinics and in our locations, but we also need to continue to protect our staffs. As Dr. Basil said, we too have not seen healthcare associated infections. They don't get infected at work. They get infected out in the community. And we know that a significant portion, upwards of maybe 40% of the people who infect others are asymptomatic. So they aren't sick, and yet they're exposing others in our communities. The other industry that's really, really being impacted by this is our long-term care facilities. Mm-hmm. You know, we catch a lot of concern about, why can't I go visit my mother, my father, my relative, because you're still closed down. Until we see significant reduction of community spread, especially in our bigger counties, that's going to be really very difficult for us to justify opening up those facilities that have the most vulnerable of us in them. And then the last thing, we know that if your chronic illness is controlled and managed properly, you're going to be able to survive an insult like COVID-19. And so while those are risk factors, they're less of a risk factor if their illnesses are controlled. So that's why it's important to get back in, get your immunizations. We don't want a measles epidemic on top of a pandemic, on top of influenza come in a year's time. And a vaccine is still out there a ways. And that's going to be the key to controlling this virus. And SAB is going to have some great therapeutics, but they're therapeutics. And that's when the horse is already out of the barn. Or in the case of SAB, the cows are already out of the barn. So, what we can do, and the business community can help us by doing a better job of policing themselves about masking, distancing, cleaning, helping us to control the spread of this illness in our community.
You know what? I mean, it's such a simple, obvious thing, but I think to hear both of you in healthcare say that is still powerful. And yes, so we'll help you get that message out, but that's a powerful one. And it's one that just, you got to keep beating that drum, because people forget pretty fast, don't they?
It's the only tool we have to control this illness right now, is to control the individual to individual spread of this illness.
From a workforce standpoint, Doctor, I think it's going to be interesting. You know, every generation makes decisions based on these sort of formative experiences. And certainly this pandemic is going to be a huge influence on a lot of young people. And maybe it influences them into going into healthcare careers. I think it's going to be interesting to see. Yep. But as far as your immediate needs, or even your long-term projected workforce needs, they run the gamut from, you know, frontline nursing to long-term care. Is there anything the business community can be doing from a workforce development standpoint for you?
No, I think just help us to protect our staffs from getting infected, and they get infected out in the community. As Dr. Basil says, we as well have not seen healthcare associated spread of this infection in our facilities. Understand why we're limiting visitors, understand why we're doing some of the things that we're doing. You know, our pre-surgical testing is less than 1% positive. So it means that we're doing a good job of screening. But we also need people to understand. And the other concern, as this has impacted our business colleagues, is the rate of whether or not our patients have insurance coverage. And that's going to be a big impact on our fiscal bottom lines, as well as fewer and fewer folks have means to be able to cover the care that they're, whatever that care is, that drops to our bottom line in terms of uncompensated care and charity care as well. And those are things that are very concerning as we move forward in this new reality of COVID-19.
Right, yeah, another good point. Good element to bring up. Okay, thank you. I'll go back to Joni now at South Dakota Biotech. There are, I think, a lot of different ways the business community could help support the bioscience industry coming out of this. What are some of the key ones that lift up for you?
Well, I think, you know, being part of this conversation is helpful, having people understand a little bit about our industries and what it takes to get something to market, in particular in the biopharmaceutical world. And unfortunately, a lot of our companies that are emerging and starting up need investors and need angel investors. This is something that's really critical for their success, in addition to federal grants and state grants. But those have been continuing on, the federal grants, and in fact have increased a bit, at least in terms of COVID. But I think it's important for the business community to understand that they have to be supportive of this industry. What does that mean? Like, it can mean many different things. If you're an investor out there and you have some philanthropic dollars that you don't, you know, it's a high risk endeavor and you might not see a return. But if you want to take to know some of these companies, we have some pretty good recommendations. And when they hit, they can be really impactful. Keep watching SAB. I also think that it's important for us to look at the opportunities that this allows us. We talked a bit earlier about supply chain issues, and that was one of the things that was definitely highlighted with this pandemic, and onshoring some of those manufacturing opportunities here. I can't think of a better place for people to want to recruit or to move or to consider coming to than Sioux Falls. For many reasons, and in South Dakota in general, because of the wonderful healthcare systems that we have here, the support that we have patients, we have clinical trials, our universities have tremendous PhD programs that they are cranking out some really great top-notch students that really don't have jobs to go to here in the state, at least in R&D and research in particular. So I think looking at some manufacturing, looking at having companies come here, understanding what it takes, what it needs, and supporting that, I think is a tremendous opportunity for our city in particular, to really have some really interesting, high wage paying jobs and places for our students to be able to set up shop here in Sioux Falls and in South Dakota rather than going to some of the coastal states. So.
I'll stay on that theme with workforce too. You know, when we talk about workforce development, so often it comes back to STEM, those STEM skills and those related jobs, which directly go into the bioscience industry. Also a little bit of a chicken and the egg question, I think. Do you develop the talent and then find the company to employ them? Do you try to recruit the company and then develop the talent? On either side of that, Joni, where do you think we're at from a workforce development standpoint? Do we have the people here? Do we have the processes in place to develop those people here for the kinds of jobs we potentially might be able to attract coming out of this?
Yeah, I think we have we have the students here. We have the processes in place. Our universities, like I said, are really doing a great job, and they're working together to make sure that they fill the needs of the workforce. They're working with industry on many accounts to really get to know them and to say, well, are we doing the right things? Do we have the right programs? Can you help us write curriculum? If you have a workforce need, we like to partner with you in some ways for curriculum. So I think that we have a good workforce here. Where the need is for more experienced life science professionals. Because we're such a new industry here and a growing industry here, we don't have that. So some of our companies that need those experienced professionals are having to recruit from other states. And by the way, they're not having much problem. People, you know, at first might say Sioux Falls, South Dakota, you have something like that here, but they're coming. People love it here. The quality of life is wonderful. Once they have a chance to take a look around, they realize this is a pretty cool place. So I think from my perspective, it's really more the business community and the economic developers and business developers out there figuring out how do we recruit them here? And we're not going to get big companies to pick up and move to South Dakota. Well, we might actually, because we're hearing some companies in Minneapolis are a little bit tired of the politics there. So they're wanting to come here. And I'm like, I think that's a great opportunity for us, but I think there are some, in particular in the pharma world, where they're looking to partner with people to offshore some of their R&D efforts. And we have that capability right here. And I think we are well suited and positioning ourselves to have some of those really interesting conversations.
That is a perfect lead into our wrap-up question, and we will come back to you for a few more thoughts on this. But I'll ask you all to put your community hats on now as we go back through, beginning with Bill at Lewis, and let's talk about the opportunities that you see for Sioux Falls, for the broader community coming out of this pandemic. How might we position ourselves from your perspective for success?
Well, to echo Joni's thoughts, I'm South Dakota born and raised, and I'm a huge advocate of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And you could not find a better place to live, to work, and raise a family. So I think there's a lot to be proud of. And then to follow up on Dan's comments, a couple of these things I think are going to be the three probably major takeaways we're going to see. I think telemedicine itself is going to have a major play going forward. It's an ease, a convenience. I don't think that can ever replace the face-to-face communication component, because I found I'm zoomed to death. I just cannot zoom. Sorry. I like seeing people, and I think that'll come back around again. I think we also need to get re-engaged in people's health. When we have this massive interruption that occurred, people like, and especially me, I realize the older I get, the more I like continuity. And to have our life cycle interrupted, sometimes it's easier not to do the things that you should be doing for your health, kids not going to school, people staying home from church, all those kind of things. Those are very much interrupting processes that aren't good for the overall piece. And the last part of this is that Dan also mentioned long-term care. And I think you're going to see a major push here, because the most frail population is primarily in skilled nursing facilities. And I think the fact that COVID has such an immediate impact and dramatic impact on that population, you're going to see people wanting to stay in their homes longer. So we put together a smart pack process, which is a way of taking medications and keeping all your like Monday 8 o'clock meds are all in one slot on a card. So it's just a way of simplifying medications in the elderly. And I think this is something going forward. It's going to have a major impact. The Canadian model already employs it. They do about 40% of prescriptions through this central processing component. I think those are things that I think we will see evolutionary change, that people just got to figure out how to get people more engaged and how to make it easier for them. So I think Sioux Falls is on a great path. It's just that, and we tend to rally when we're challenged. And I think as long as deals, you're going to see that. I think the community will support each other. I'm really concerned about the restaurants. I'm really concerned about the clothing industry, all those places, because that's a function of traffic. And we just need to make sure we're strong as our weakest link. You make sure our weakest link is strong.
Okay, great thoughts. Thanks very much for being with us. Great to hear from you. I'll go back to Dr. Basil at Avera now to talk about those broader opportunities. And I think maybe Bill gave a good lead in there on the virtual healthcare side. Many people still don't realize just the vast national infrastructure for virtual care that exists right here in Sioux Falls. Is that a growth opportunity for us coming out of COVID? And do you see other growth opportunities?
I would say that's been a definite silver lining in all of this. Certainly, we talked about, working from home. That's been a big step forward for us, because we've had so many of our workers at home. We're learning what job descriptions are really working well at home versus ones that really need that face-to-face interaction. So, maybe being able to reduce some operating expenses that way, like many businesses are, is one piece. But then that patient side of things, we've made such a huge progress on, when we shut down a lot of in-person clinic visits, transitioning those over to virtual visits, and insurers, at least in the short term here, are paying for those. And that's been just wonderful to learn, how much of what we used to do face-to-face in medicine can be handled virtually. Sometimes, laying on the hands is still absolutely required, but sometimes it's not. And so that's been a big step forward. The other point that I'll make, kind of looking through the future, is testing. And early on in these days, testing supplies were so limited, and we were so limited on who we could test. Now we've got greatly expanded ability to help out testing individuals. Pretty much anybody with any degree of symptoms we can test now. And we're starting to work with how can we support businesses on their testing needs, and what does that look like so that we, as other industries are opening up, how can we help them through that process, through what we've learned in opening ourselves back up, and that pre-surgical testing and all of those sorts of things. So I think there'll be a lot more gains to come in the next few months from that standpoint, that we can really help get the economy going again.
Good. Okay, great. Thank you. I'll go back to Scott Cross now again at Lewis. What kind of opportunities do you see for the broader community going forward?
In light of the epidemic and the social unrest in the country, can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, good. I'm just extremely grateful to live in Sioux Falls, and I think other people are going to recognize Sioux Falls and other rural communities as being an ideal place to live and raise a family. So I think what we need to do as a city is maybe continue to prepare for an influx of new residents. I think anything from affordable housing and jobs and those types of things, because I do think we're going to see new people moving away from the city, the larger cities, Minneapolis, New York, whatever, and relocating to a city our size. And so I think that's and there's a lot of opportunities that come with that, particularly in the retail industry. But that would be my prediction.
Yeah, I can see that as well. All right, great. Thanks again for joining us. I'll go back to Dr. Heinemann now at Sanford. Sanford consistently brings in talent from all over the world, really, but all over the country for sure. What opportunities do you see to position the community favorably here going forward?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, Joni, that this pandemic has highlighted. And a lot of us and a lot of businesses use just-in-time delivery. I order what I need when I need it, and I want it when I need it after I ordered it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't work for when you need a whole bunch of masks or a whole bunch of testing supplies, as Dr. Basil said. So I think we're going to need to rethink some of that as a state, as a community, as healthcare organizations, to make sure that we've got adequate supplies, because we don't know. We are so globally connected that our masks. I just took a new mask yesterday morning out of I get a mask a week, and it's got Chinese all over it because they come from China. The other thing that I think we're going to need to do as a community is our public health infrastructure needs to be updated and strengthened. And we need to understand where the least of us in our communities and how we support the least of us in our communities. One of the challenges that we had with this pandemic was, how do we deal with homeless individuals who come down with COVID-19? How do you isolate when you have no home to go to? And those were some of the earlier challenges. So as a community, Sioux Falls needs to wrestle with some of those issues. And that's a community issue that we can help with, but that's a community issue. So those are a couple of things. Our public health infrastructure, understanding that we're all in this together when we get to a point like this, and then how we work best together to kind of solve some of these vexing issues. So those are a few things that I would like to leave as closing comments.
Yeah, good thoughts. Thanks very much. And again, I'll come back to Joni, who I think really set the stage for this nicely, with this notion that, there are companies right now that might not have been open to relocating that now are, and they're going to be looking for certain qualities in their communities. We also have homegrown biotech companies. Again, I don't want to overhype this, but if certain dominoes fall here, the platform technology that SAB Biotherapeutics has presents some really interesting opportunities to grow and to potentially bring in even more partnerships. So Joni, closing thoughts here. What do you see as some of those bigger opportunities for Sioux Falls?
Well, I think what we've learned many things with this pandemic, and one of them is that we South Dakota companies know how to pivot, we know how to respond, we can change, we can adapt, and we can do it with ease. We don't have the regulatory burdens that other states have and other countries have. We've come together and worked together, and I think that's something that is really important for us to message out there to others. I also think I hope that we start bragging a bit more, and myself included, with our biotech companies. There's so many amazing things that happen here in Sioux Falls and in South Dakota in general. And I don't know if people really appreciate what we have here and what we provide for our companies and for our workforce and for our community. Some of the things you write our newsletters, you do a great job with that. And when we send those out to all across the nation, you cannot believe the people that respond to me, my counterparts in other states, pretty close relationship with, will say, wow, that's some cool stuff you have going on in South Dakota. And we get some national attention just from us and how we disseminate our information. So I really hope that we take these opportunities, we listen to them. Definitely manufacturing in the biotech industry, bringing some onshore manufacturing here would be really an amazing opportunity, not just for the state, but really for our companies as well. It's going to be easier for them to work with them if they're in our backyard. So hopefully we can help with some of those conversations moving forward.
All right, fantastic closing thoughts. Thank you so much, everybody. We knew there'd be a lot to talk about. There definitely was. I'm sure we could even continue, but that was just a really valuable overview. So again, thanks to all of our panelists. Thanks to you for watching. You are going to be receiving a survey from Zoom where you will be invited to share your own thoughts about the same questions that our panelists were asked. And then join us a week from now, again, same time for our final panel. And we're going to be talking about information and technology services. So I'm sure that will be another very interesting one. You can find this on replay if you'd like to send it to your colleagues or anyone else in the community that you think might be interested in it. Go over to YouTube, look up the Sioux Falls Development Foundation's channel. You'll find this one there. You'll find the last 2 weeks there as well. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you, Jody.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see all of you.
Great. Have a good day.
All right, you too.